From URA, Mr. Ibrahim Bosa Chiwuka, who is the Assistant Commissioner, Public and Corporate Affairs.
Thank you very much, moderator, and a very good morning. I bring greetings from the Commissioner General of the Uganda Revenue Authority, who would have loved to be here with you. In his absence, I will take the singular honor to be able to read out his remarks to you. Our chief guest, the leadership of the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, the leadership of the ASIATI, Uganda, officials from the ministry, business community, political religious leaders, members of civil society, the URA staff here representing us, members of the media, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning to you all, and I thank God for this day and for the opportunity to be before you this morning to address you. Thank you for the invitation, where we can be able to discuss and understand, especially the opportunities and possibilities that come with the new budgeting process for the next financial year. As you are aware, the Honorable Minister of Finance, Planning and Economic Development unveiled a new financial year's 48 trillion budget last week. Of this figure, 25.5 trillion, which is about 53% of the budget, is to be financed from taxes and non-tax revenue sourced internally, and the rest from aids and grants. Ladies and gentlemen, much as we are supposed to contribute 53% towards this budget, our ultimate national aspirations is to attain economic independence, where our national expenditure is fully funded domestically by all of us. No nation attains true sovereignty without the ability to fully fund its expenditure without relying on external help, and our hope of getting external support is also dwindling very fast, simply because our lenders are also focusing on themselves. Our current tax to GDP ratio has stagnated at 13%, below the average 16% of the sub-Saharan Africa. This has placed us in a position where we must turn to external borrowing, which often comes with unfavorable terms and conditions. Developed countries collect more than 30% of their tax to GDP. And research has shown that for any country to develop, it must collect at least 20% of GDP. And we at the Uganda Revenue Authority are convinced that it is possible if every tax-eligible citizen plays their civic duty. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Minister of Finance, Planning and Economic Development did not announce any new taxes because statistics have shown that we have the potential to raise this revenue and more if all eligible citizens pay their fair share. I must point out that improvements have been made by way of a few amendments in the Income Tax, the VAT tax, the Tax Procedures Code Act, the Stamp Duty Act, and the Tax Appeals Tribunal Act. All these are purposed to further streamline revenue mobilization and to ease tax compliance. Unregistered traders and undeclared employment dominate our economy. The current tax register has about 2.4 million taxpayers out of a population of 45 million Ugandans. There are over 7 million people engaged in income-generating activities, but many are not contributing to the tax basket. So realizing the new revenue target is a collective effort and commitment across government, civil society, private sector, and development partners, and this is paramount. At the Uganda Revenue Authority, we have instituted mechanisms to improve our efficiency in service delivery to enhance taxpayer compliance towards realizing this new target. These initiatives are all in line with the government's domestic revenue mobilization strategy. And what are we doing? We are engaging in taxpayer education, service and communication, where we have developed and rolled out a full taxpayer education and improvement service delivery strategy to promote transparency, information sharing, partnership with stakeholders, and facilitating taxpayers through improved service provision and basically focusing on aspects of stakeholder engagement, intensive tax education, simplified and automated processes to enhance voluntary compliance, usage of sector-based approach to customer satisfaction, adoption of the use of mobile tax offices. We currently have one mobile tax office, which, if you have seen, called the Tujenge bus, and we're expecting 2 more, so that we are able to be in places in this country where we do not have physical offices. We have also improved client support through an upgraded contact center that is state-of-the-art. We are also engaged in data management and analytics. In line with the budget theme, which is highlighting digital transformation, we have embarked on the consolidation of the use of smart business solutions we introduced over the past couple of years. I think predominantly many know the digital tax stamps, the electronic physical receipting and invoicing solutions, which are there to improve the collection of local excise duty and the value-added tax heads respectively. We have also adopted the alternative dispute and conflict resolution. We have also adopted a faster and tax dispute resolution through independent reviews and alternative dispute resolution platforms. We are also uplifting resource capacity at the Uganda Revenue Authority. Internally, we have equally recommitted ourselves to be more efficient, transparent, and accountable in what we do. We are deliberately promoting accountability amongst all our staff, guided by the values of patriotism, integrity, and professionalism. And at this note, would want to thank the government of Uganda that has supported us in the recruitment of 600 new staff that we received yesterday. As I conclude, as we end this financial year in the coming 10 days or so, I extend my appreciation to all of you for your continued support to develop our country by honoring your tax obligations. Your selfless contribution amidst the global economic hardship is commendable. Our target for this financial year was 22.4 trillion, and we're optimistic that together we are going to achieve it come June 30th of this month. As of yesterday, we were at 20.5 trillion, and we need only 2 trillion to finish this year, this financial year, successfully. So for those of you who have not been paying taxes, it is not too late. There is room to correct any previous mistakes. URA is working towards a data-driven approach to taxation. The third-party information already in our domain and that which we expect to receive from our third-party partners for the next financial year will enrich our risk profiling of taxpayers and inform more targeted audits and investigations. As we close the current financial year, and file our income tax returns. I call upon each of you not to tire from meeting your tax obligations. Declare fully your income and enable us determine the correct taxes or the correct position due to you. This is the highest form of demonstrating individual integrity and personal responsibility as a fully committed citizen to seeing Uganda prosper. As the Uganda Revenue Authority, we are committed to doing everything within our might to ensure that the revenue mobilization gains achieved in the past 2 financial years are not only consolidated, but further improved upon. I wish you a successful discussion. For God and my country, John Musinguzi, Commissioner General of the Uganda Revenue Authority. I submit.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ibrahim Bosa Chibuka. That was the remarks that are focusing on the East African Council of Ministers' decision for the financial year 2022 into 2023. Now, in regards to this background, the National Budget Month partners, including the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, including the Uganda Revenue Authority, Siatini Uganda, among others, have organized the Post-East African Community Tax and Budget Dialogue under the theme Accelerating Economic Recovery and Enhancing Productive sectors to improve livelihood in the East African regions, and they're focusing on defining joint strategies for a faster recovery. Of course, one of the specific objectives out of this dialogue are understanding the various measures passed by the East African Council of Ministers in the financial year 2022-2023 and their implication on regional integration process, equip Ugandans and key stakeholders with relevant knowledge and information on tax, on debt, trade and other fiscal related issues to inspire informed debates and effective citizen participation. On that note, we then move on to the next issue on our agenda. Second on our agenda this morning, leveraging the African Continental Free Trade Area to accelerate economic recovery and enhancing productive sectors for improved livelihood. Presentation is going to be focusing on the link between the domestic revenue mobilization and the African Continental Free Trade Area. And here to give us this presentation is Ms. Jen Nalunga, who's the Executive Director with Siatini, Uganda.
Okay. Thank you so much, Regina, and good morning once again. Our presentation as Siatini and other partners is about the CFTA. We are linking the CFTA to domestic resource mobilization within the East African region. Most often when we talk about the CFTA, we talk about the opportunities there, but what are the link between the Continental Free Trade Area and our domestic resource mobilization? With increased trade within the CFTA help us to fill the fiscal gap, because all the previous speakers have been talking about a fiscal gap within Uganda, but within the entire region. So we need to understand the CFTA and its link to domestic resource mobilization. But maybe also this presentation will help us to link more trade and revenue mobilization, the economy, how the economy is performing, and fiscal fiscal challenges. As an introduction, the CFTA puts in place a common market for 55 African states that are members of the African Union. 54 countries have signed, one country hasn't. You know the country, you know, Eritrea hasn't, even up to now, signed the CFTA, and 43 countries have already ratified, and maybe for the East African countries, it's only Southern Sudan which hasn't ratified the CFTA. The rest of the East African countries have ratified the CFTA. And by number of participating countries, the CFTA is it's the largest free trade area globally. The agreement seeks to establish a continental customs union. That's the aspiration anyway. The Continental Customs Union. And those of you who read history, when you remember the Lagos Plan of Action, that was the plan that we are going to have one continental customs union. And that will help us also to negotiate with third parties like the European Union. And it sticks, the CFTA, the agreement, sets out to reduce or remove tariffs among member states and introduce common rates for goods and services. Also, the agreement is looking at reducing and removal of non-tariff barriers. That's just a graphical presentation of how many countries have signed, how many countries have. We go to another, have ratified. A number of researchers estimate that this agreement, if fully implemented, you know, it has so many promises. We lift 30 million people out of extreme poverty, and that's a World Bank study. And that the real gains from the full implementation of the CFTA, but we increase by 7% by 2035 to nearly 450 billion US dollars. That there is also potential to boost intra-African trade by 52.3% if import duties are eliminated, and also double that trade if non-tariff barriers are reduced. So what's the problem? Although the potential, you know, we have seen the promises and the potential, there are concerns about the revenue losses in the short and medium term as a result of the removal of tariffs on imported commodities. When you look at the tariff schedules, and Director from Economic Policy, Minister of Finance, has raised these issues about the tariff liberalization. We are supposed to liberalize 90% of our tariff lines, non-sensitive products, 7% sensitive. Sensitive products are those products which have elements of food security, of fiscal revenue, and also in industrialization. So for 7%, we are supposed as non-LDC like Uganda to reduce our tariffs after 10 years, and for developing countries 13 years. They have excluded 3%, totally excluded them. So in total, we are liberalizing 97% of our tariff lines, our trade with the rest of Africa. However, there are no clear mitigation strategies to deal with the expected fiscal deficits, especially for economies which are heavily reliant on custom duties. How are they going to fund their budgets? You know, that fiscal gap, how are they going to fund that? There is a hope that when you liberalize, when you trade goes up, that it will compensate for the taxes. But this is in the long term. So, and what we have seen also is that international trade taxes contribute a lot. In some countries, like the table below, in some countries it goes up to more than 50%. The table below, please. The table below shows the domestic taxes against the customs. The orange, the customs revenue from trade, international trade. So you see there are some countries which really depend on custom duties, customs revenue. Therefore, go down. Siatini and some other partners, we are undertaking a study to examine the extent to which EAC partner states rely on international trade taxes to finance their domestic budgets. Then two, to ascertain which countries contribute mostly to EAC international trade. More specifically, EAC partner states trading mostly within Africa or from elsewhere. And this will determine the impact of the CFTA reduction in taxes. And also want to assess the extent to which the CFTA is likely to affect international trade taxes for each partner states. This is an ongoing study, and we are looking for more data, and we also are looking for more information. So these are just preliminary findings, but they are flagging out the issue that we need to be aware of a fiscal gap when we liberalize under the we have used information from those reports, and we have also done secondary data analysis. Down, Herbert. The importance of customs revenue in ESC. When you look at that table, it shows that domestic taxes revenue contribute more than half to tax revenues in the ESC, but also customs revenue play an important role in funding national budgets. When you look at Uganda, it's up the other. Uganda, it's 42%. Burundi, the green one is those are the domestic taxes. The red one are the customs taxes. For Uganda, it's 58. Domestic taxes, customs 42%, and those are the countries: Burundi, Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda. Go down. The second table, the table below, indicates import revenue sources, import duties as a percentage of total tax revenue across the years from 2015 to 2019. For Uganda, 2015 up to 23% in 2019, and for the 5 years, the average is 23% of total tax revenue, import duties as a percentage of total tax revenues. The next slide is an assessment of whether EAC partners states are trading with each other. EAC partners trading in Africa. For the EAC member states import mostly from outside Africa. We are not importing from Africa. And at least a quarter of imports in Rwanda and Burundi are, however, from Africa. Imports from Africa for Uganda accounts for 23%. So when you look at Kenya and Tanzania, they import very little from Africa. So the extent to which we are importing from Africa will determine the impact on our fiscal revenues when we are negotiating or signing the CFTA. The next slide, again, it shows, again, we are looking at our trade, with the rest of Africa, and our share of trade with the rest of Africa, the imports. You go down. Then we ask ourselves, why do African countries import mostly from outside Africa? Because you remember that CFTA is about boosting intra-Africa trade, which is very low. But we are looking at what are those challenges. Why aren't we trading within Africa? Because one, we produce similar products, these are agricultural commodities and minerals. Two, there are also challenges of infrastructure. And these are the challenges which are going to affect the CFTA, because it's really difficult, even when you are traveling, to travel from here to North Africa. To go to Morocco, you have to go outside the continent, then come back to the continent. So when you look at the infrastructure, we were wired to go to our colonial masters. So the issue of infrastructure is very, very important. Then issues of political conflicts, which also affect the markets. So the implication is that even when we sign the CFTA agreement, it's not a sufficient condition to increase EAC trade with the rest of Africa. And the person who did this study is within this room, Isaac. He's there, and I agree with that analysis. Again, that table also indicates the state of our intra-EAC trade as East Africa. EAC partner states, are we trading among ourselves? And we found out that Rwanda, Burundi, and Uganda import mostly within the EAC. Kenya and Tanzania, on the other hand, import mostly from outside the EAC bloc. And that graph is it's an average of 5 years when it comes to importing within the EAC and importing within the EAC region. Again, the next table is again about our trade, the share of imports from Africa for Uganda, Burundi, Rwanda, and Kenya and Tanzania. For Uganda, Burundi, and Rwanda, our share of imports they have been increasing, while Kenya and Tanzania, their share of imports from Africa has been going down. And that's why you find Kenya is negotiating also a lot with, they want to negotiate the economic partnership agreement with the European Union, and that will also increase imports from the European Union. Okay, so the next slide is about the implication of the CFTA on ESC revenue. There are two ways through which the ESC will lose customs revenue as a result of the CFTA. Automatically, one, when we reduce our revenue, you know, the negotiations which Mr. Kagwa was talking about, you know, when we reduce 90% our tariffs in category A, automatically we are losing revenue. But maybe the second way will be through trade diversion by countries outside Africa exporting to other destinations as a result of increased tariffs in Africa. So that again, we need to look at how we negotiate with third parties after we have negotiated among ourselves as Africa. So the next slide, the conservative estimates by researchers at the EPRC suggest that in terms of absolute amounts, Kenya will incur the largest loss, followed by Uganda at $14.2 million and $13.5 million respectively. EPRC did a study, and I think Isaac, Mr. Chinyenko, it's on your website, isn't it? You can refer to that, because that's also a heavy loss, which we can see how, if it's true, how we can, you know, we need to strategize on how to address that fiscal gap. For Tanzania, it's 5.3 million. Burundi, it's also there. Rwanda is there. But that study says, in terms of proportional losses of tariff revenue, Burundi will incur the largest proportion of 30%, followed by Uganda 7.6%, Rwanda 5.5%, and Kenya 4%, and Tanzania 3.7%. So what are the lessons for the ESC as we prepare for the CFTA? There will certainly be revenue loss for each of the participating countries, at least in the short and medium term. The revenue loss automatically is there. There is a need to effectively participate in the ongoing tariff negotiations. In the tariff negotiations, the negotiators have completed category A. There is negotiations for category B and category C. So effective implementation of the CFTA will start after the member states have defined their schedule of tariff concessions, because the tariff concessions are part of the agreement. Although officially trading under the CFTA was supposed to start January 1st, 2021, it hasn't effectively started because of those tariff negotiations. And as the director pointed out, category A is done, but category B and category C is yet to be conclusively concluded. Way forward, each partner state should put in place measures internally to cover up the revenue shortfall. So when you are planning for revenues, my brothers and sisters in URA, there is that revenue loss shortfall in the short and medium term, which we need to address. Then there is a need to leverage the envisaged increase in volumes and value of trade for other broad-based taxes such as VAT to compensate for customs revenue losses. No, because the assumption is that we open up the CFTA, we are losing the customs revenue, but we can compensate with other taxes. Therefore, the onus is upon the governments of the respective ES countries to strengthen institutional quality in tax revenue administration to minimize the revenue losses. But the entire issue is to know that there is a revenue gap and to be able to plan for that. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jen Nalunga, Executive Director, Siatini, Uganda, for that address. Of course, she was talking about the African Continental Trade-Free Area, and her presentation was bearing in mind the fact that we can actually have the link between domestic revenue mobilization and the Africa Continental Trade-Free Area. Of course, also her presentation was majorly focusing on the extent upon which this trade-free area is likely to affect international trade taxes for each of the partner states and the potential opportunities for boosting domestic revenue mobilizations as a result of implementation of it. And one of the questions that has been raised from her address, will potential domestic revenues expected increase trade within the region? Are they going to help fill the fiscal gaps, at least in the long run? That's a question that has raised eyebrows. And also, through her submission, are there strategies in the Africa Continental Trade-Free Area Agreement to help partner states that largely depend on international trade taxes? And are they going to be able to fill the budget deficits in the short run? So those are questions that are yet to be answered. Well, we are in good time, because then the panel that is coming up next may give us direction in that regard and help us answer those two questions. And this panel is going to be sharing their perspective on the presentation above. So ladies and gentlemen, now into the meat of this dialogue, where we get to focus on some of these subject matters. Allow me to introduce to you our first panel for this morning. We do have Mr. Moses Kagwa. Mr. Moses Kagwa is the Director, Economic Affairs under the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development. Mr. Moses Kagwa, you are most welcome to the panel. Our generic theme is accelerating economic recovery and enhancing productive sectors for improved livelihood in the East African region, and of course defining joint strategies for a faster recovery. By joint strategies, we are looking at the East African community that has Uganda, it has Rwanda, it has Kenya, it has Tanzania, it has Burundi, South Sudan, and most recently the DRC that has joined the East African community. Now joining Mr. Moses Kagwa is Mr. Simon Kaheru, who's going to be joining us online. He is the chair, the East African Business Council Uganda chapter. He'll be joining us online. Mr. Simon Kaheru, you are most welcome to this dialogue.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody.
He is going to be joined also by Dr. Geoffrey Owich Okaka. Dr. Geoffrey Owich Okaka is the Assistant Commissioner, Trade Uganda Revenue Authority. You're most welcome, Mr. Owich. And then finally on our panel online, joining us is Mr. Donald Tindamanyire, who's the Principal Customs Officer, Tariffs, Valuation and Rules of Origin, and that is the East African Community Secretariat. Good morning to you, Mr. Donald.
Good morning and thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Here to moderate this dialogue is Dr. Fred Muhumza, who's a senior economist. Dr. Fred Muhumza, you are most welcome.
Good morning. Hope it is still morning. Sometimes we sit in meetings online with Indians, and we think it is afternoon when it is still morning, or with the Japanese who are even far east. A very interesting conversation for people viewing us from wherever you are. I want to avoid some questions that should not come to this meeting on why was it not a panel but a manual. After all, I have a seat the other side. Madam Jane Nalonga, you cannot survive coming back to this podium to answer any question that may be pending to you. As you come, I will ask my panelists who are in the house to begin with. 2 minutes, what do you have to say about the theme of the day? I know I have questions for you, but a blank check is always in order in hard times like this. When you invoice the bank, what do you think are your problems? Let me begin with the one who looks like himself, in the middle. You know what that means? That uniform is authority, right? I always tell people I don't stop because a police officer has stopped me. I stop to the uniform. If I find them without that uniform, I'll pass them. So let's start with the uniform.
Okay, yeah. Yes, good morning, viewers and participants. I'm Dr. Kaka Geoffrey Owich. I'm the Assistant Commissioner Trade in the Custom Department of Uganda Revenue Authority. Yeah, my brief comment on the theme of today, looking at leveraging the African Continental Free Trade Area to accelerate economic recovery and enhancing productive sector for the improved livelihood, being the theme. Yeah, when you look at the whole perspective in the ESC per se, the way they align themselves to this theme, the first aspect is to look at the budget itself in terms of the volume, the value. When you look at the budget itself, you find that ESC within Kenya had the highest budget of 28.62, and then followed by Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi. This is self-explanatory, saying that in that aspect that Kenya has the biggest budget, reflecting the size of the economy. But when you look at the whole budgets within the ESC, we see that all budget is directed towards a recovery from the effect of the COVID, the pandemic. And in this case, you find that Tanzania, their budget aim, it aimed at accelerating recovery and strengthening and sustaining growth. For Kenya, the aim is accelerating growth in uncertain times. And for Uganda, we are looking at full monetization of Uganda's economy through commercial agriculture. And basically, these are aspects that you will see ourselves being aligned, and that's briefly what I can talk about the theme of the budget today.
Thank you very much. Commission Director Kagwa.
I think the theme resonates well with the intentions or the aspirations in the East African community that we need to recover from the adverse effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. We have had a lot of issues that we've suffered. We've had increasing debt during COVID-19 because all of us had to borrow to ensure that we safeguard lives and livelihoods. In that difficult time, we suffered huge shortfalls in taxation, we also realized that during this period, there are things that we can do as countries that we should stop relying on imports and replace them. We saw how we went digital. That time we had meetings in Zoom, which we still have. We moved away from conferences like this. We also started being innovative. In manufacturing, we started manufacturing products from our countries, sanitizers. We are putting up pharmaceutical plants to try and do away with this. And really the move is to try and see that as much as possible that we harness our productive capacities going forward. So yes, the theme is really very, very important for recovery. Thank you.
Now, staying with you, Director Kagwa, I think you have excited people by saying no new taxes in the next budget. And but this is about defining joint strategies. What did the other partners do? Are they also on no new taxes? Did they completely remove some taxes? Did they introduce new ones? How is the harmonization in the tax space working for us going forward?
Well, of course, we talked about non-new taxes as Uganda because we are trying to ensure that we help businesses to recover, and we also don't increase the costs to pass on the costs to the consumers. We also noted that a lot of work we can do to collect more taxes, as long as the taxes are clear, as long as they are simplified, and then as long as they are enforced. In the other partner states, some changes were made, but most of these, for example, in Kenya, were to reduce. They are trying to see how they can use the tax system to promote businesses, to promote consumption, and in a bit of that also in Tanzania. But overall, it was more of clarification of the taxes to make the taxes simple. When you talk about harmonization, we are still struggling as a region to try to harmonize, because national interests are still prominent. And the initiatives we have really attempted to ensure that we harmonize taxes have not been very successful. We had started with taxes that are excisable, taxes on soft drinks, taxes on beer, because we thought that was the easiest as we move into the region. But the pace has been slow, because we wanted to harmonize not only the rates, but also the bases, so that when we talk about excise and what it's applicable upon, then it should be the same. But we haven't received consensus, and of course this has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, when we couldn't really meet and try to handle most of these issues. When we look also at the VAT space, we try to harmonize the bases. What is VAT, so that everybody understands when this tax is payable. We try to look at the schedules for exemptions and zero rating, what we should include in zero rating, what should be included in exemptions. But we haven't also agreed on that. It is something that is on the table but not yet agreed. Even the rates themselves, we have not yet harmonized them, because some people don't want to come down and others don't want to come up. But it's a process, and I think on the whole there have been some movements towards harmonization, but it hasn't yet happened. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Kagwa. It is always a process, and want to find out whether the private sector is playing their role in that process. And private sector here is not Jane Nalunga and Siatini, but you actually have the East African Business Council, and Simon Kaheru is out there. I don't know whether he's on the other side of the DRC, and he couldn't go through the volcanoes. But wherever you are, Simon, you'll tell us. But we're trying to find out what has been the role of the East African Business Council in this process of integration that seems to be slower than I want to believe the private sector would want it to be. Simon, wherever you are, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I am still within the East African community. I'm actually in Kigali right now for the Commonwealth Business Forum under CHOGM 22. So I'm at work with you. But Siatini, thank you very much for hosting this conversation and putting us in the same room with eminent people who are running one side of the economy. And Fred, you're right. The government experts, Moses and Mr. Kukia, cannot achieve anything without the private sector. And I think you're even more correct when you say the private sector has a more major role to play. Now, the East African Business Council is the apex body of the private sector in East Africa. And our principal role is to activate that same private sector involvement in ESC integration. ESC integration, what all the partner states agreed from the start was that it was not going to be left to the governments to integrate, because governments can't tell the people to work together, to trade, to interact, to intermarry. They can do so, but the people will not respond. It was very clear from the experiences before, the East African community, as we knew it at first, and even from other regional trade and economic blocs, that people interact with or without governments. That's how history has been. And that's why the East African community integration was very clearly stated as needing to be people-based, but private sector-led. We found that even if two governments, two political groupings across borders were not seeing eye to eye, the people on either side of that border need to live. And because of that, they would trade, they would interact. Their daughters and sons would meet and, create other East Africans. So we as East African Business Council present that private sector fund that has a number of roles. One, advocate for private sector interests, so that as the governments are making plans, creating policy and implementing those plans, the private sector interests, the interests of the people. And Fred, I must correct you when you say private sector is not Siatini and Fred Mumza. You are part of the private sector. And even Moses Kagwa, when he walks out of his office, becomes part of the private sector. But that conversation we'll have later on. So if we ensure that those private sector interests are put at the fore as the governments are, working on this East African community integration from the formal side. We also ensure that we identify where there are barriers to integration and integration through trade. That's why we talk a lot about non-tariff barriers, unnecessary complications that stop the East African community from working as one. We identify them, work to mobilize the people, our private sector colleagues, to come together with the public sector and find solutions so that trade can happen, which will then advance integration. And then one very, very important role and very crucial role that we play or seek to play as the apex body of the private sector is getting this information down to the very last man, woman, in the very last corner of each of these East African community nations. The protocols that we speak about that form the East African community, that the East African community is supposed to run on, are massive documents, very heavy. They are not read by many of our people. So we have that role of breaking it down and making it easy for any trader down there to understand that there is an advantage if they can identify it, and then push it forward. We give them information through the business and trade associations, which form the East African Business Council, as well as through the different companies and organizations. So we provide advisory services both ways, to the people and to the governments. And then we keep our private sector players engaged and motivated to think East Africa, to operate East African, even if they're running an entity that's only active in Uganda or Rwanda. By highlighting to them that, for instance, the DRC is joining the community, we get them to think bigger, start looking for bigger opportunities. Not everybody is going to be trading in Rolexes on the street corner. Some of them have got to start thinking bigger about popularizing Rolex in the DRC, for instance, which will then create more opportunities for poultry farmers in Uganda, and so on and so forth. So there are many connections that we try to put together, and you find that the East African Business Council consists, like I said, of those associations, but also the most forward-thinking companies and organizations who bring what they know, their experiences, to bear and build capacity among the other private sector players who sometimes we call them small and medium enterprises, and the Juakali ones. We still have a lot of work to do. And you're right, we want EAC integration to move faster. We will continue to be impatient so that we trigger acceleration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and glad to see some clouds behind you. That must be the Rio Kigali that I know. It might be about rain, country over 1,000 hills. I want to cross over and stay in the clouds. We call it online, we call it in the clouds. And bring in Donald Tindamanyire from the ESC Secretariat. And I think there is business there to develop or harmonize or operationalize the common external tariff. Is that good for domestic revenue mobilization? Knowing very well, as Director Kagwa here has mentioned, we still have some unilateralism, protectionism at individual level, and then the common external tariff is supposed to be speaking to the integration. So what is your experience, Mr. Tindamanyire, wherever you are? Will also tell us which space that is. Is he able to connect? Or his cloud has shifted? Okay.
Yes, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Yeah, thank you. Once again, good morning. And I just want to assure you that I'm within East Africa, currently in Entebbe. And on the question that you have raised, indeed, the common external tariff is one of the important annexes that signify our togetherness at the customs union. And to that effect, we embarked into a comprehensive review of the common external tariff, which one among the objective was to promote value addition activities within the region in order to spur industrialization, especially on sectors where as EAC we have a comparative advantage. As Director Kagwa had submitted, we are happy to note that after 4 years of the review, finally partner states have agreed to introduce the 4th ban, where some of the products have been assigned higher rates of 35%. But we also have cases where raw materials, which when we started implementing the customs union, were attracting 0%. As the region, we've now developed capacity to manufacture them. So they've now been moved to 10%. But we also have cases where intermediate products, which we are attracting 10%. But again, our private sector have developed capacity and hence a need to protect them. So they have now been moved to 25%. Now, when it comes to uniform application, as it was alluded earlier, the council in some cases have allowed or granted a partner state a stay of application to defer the CET rate, and in cases to apply a higher rate or a lower rate. As it was earlier submitted, for Republic of Uganda, you have some tariff lines like mineral water, potatoes, where you'll be applying a rate more than what the CET provides for. But the whole essence is to ensure that the nascent industry are well protected. Now, with the review, what we are expecting is that it's indeed going to mobilize domestic revenue, because from the protection, it is anticipated that we have efficiency in production. Our factories are going to improve in terms of their utilized capacity, employ more people, which the outcome will be an increase in payroll taxes, that is skills development levy, as well as pay as you earn. When it comes to excisable goods, we have items like liquor, wines, mineral waters. So we are anticipating that our revenue departments are going to collect more in terms of the excise duty. But also on VAT, which is tax on consumption, it is anticipated that once we have more production, this will increase the volume of goods that will be consumed in respective partner states, and thus increase the taxes in terms of VAT. Now, we also have an aspect of corporate tax, where we believe, since our factories will be fully utilized, it means the profit that they are going to realize will have an impact in terms of the corporate tax that they are going to pay. But you also note that there could be some of the intermediate of raw materials which will be imported outside the community, which attract either 10% or 25%. And as we all know, VAT or excise duty, some of them are tax compounding taxes. So indeed, as you are promoting maximum production, firms are going to import raw materials, which they are going to pay tax, and out of that tax, apart from the import duty, you will have an aspect of domestic taxes. So in brief, I would say that the review that we have concluded is expected to have a very positive impact in terms of domestic tax mobilization. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tindamanyire. I want to stay with you for one more question. You have raised issues, and that's why I don't want Simon to put me in the private sector. I know I belong there, but sometimes for us, we set the policies, and we can mention some nice things. The process can drag on, and it's okay. We are working on it. But private sector people really want it to click. Now, with all the challenges we've had in the ESC, why should anyone be excited about the bigger thing, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which is even wider, possibly going to face more bigger challenges? Do you want to give any assurances to Simon and any other private sector person out there listening to us? Why should they be excited that that big thing is coming or has come? What are the challenges? What do we need to do better to take advantage and realize those benefits?
Yeah, thank you. As you have rightly said, indeed, a lot of people are excited about the AFCFTA, and just like in any other integration, there are challenges, and we have seen, even with the EAC experience, that at times integration is not performing the way I would expect. We have seen the persistent non-tariff barriers, bad infrastructure, inadequacy or lack of awareness by the players, lack of ownership of the private sector, that is at times partner states negotiate without fully involving the private sector in order to own the process. And as we all know, whatever we are negotiating at the end of the day, it's the private sector who are the key players in terms of, especially like the goods, trading goods, because they are the one who are going to manufacture goods, but whatever the technologies, that their role is just to negotiate on the policy aspects. So why people should be interested is that they gain. From the ESP experience, you note that the intertrade has tremendously grown up. So we are expecting that even with the AFCFTA, trade should be high. Of course, there is that fear of loss of revenue, but as it was earlier submitted in the study, you note that most of the EAC are trading with the rest of the world. So that fear should not be that much worrying. But we also note instances where we are going to attract investors, foreign direct investment, but also investors within the African continent. So that's another area that it provides comfort. But also at EAC, we have developed implementation strategy at regional level, but also at partner states level to address capacity gaps. And also we are currently undertaking sensitization and capacity building programs. Even as we speak today, there is a training of trainers undertaken in Mombasa. All is to ensure that the region benefits from the whatever we are anticipating to come out from the AFCFTA. But last and not least is just to submit that private sector played a very key role. They were consulted in the whole process, especially where we were developing EAC common position towards the negotiation. So in brief, I think these are the areas that should provide comfort that private sector and the EAC as the region will benefit out of the AFCFTA. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Donald Tindamanyire. I want to immediately cross over to Simon. And Simon, feel free to conscript us in the private sector, but certainly we might give assurances that you may not be comfortable with, you who holds the steering wheel, much as we might be sharing the car. Private sector sees things differently. We already have COVID-19 and Ukraine disrupting trade in Africa. We already see those kinds of things happening. And we want to really, we're receiving assurances from the EAC that this should work out to the African Continental Free Trade Area. But from where you sit in the private sector, and given the experience of COVID, the experience of the Ukraine-Russian war, things we thought would not disturb us, and we are getting instructions we should not buy Russian oil, even when it's not banned internationally. Where you sit in the private sector, what do you think lies ahead amidst all these challenges for the African Free Continental Trade Area?
Fred, I honestly believe, and most of us do, and by the way, that's the nature of the private sector. That's why we're given this important role to play when it comes to things like East African community integration and bettering, livelihoods. We are always optimistic, and we always know that there is opportunity ahead. Yeah, optimism, opportunity ahead. We actually thrive when there are problems. You know the saying, no pain, no gain. If you go into a business venture and money is coming in very easily, then something's not right. That's more or less a Ponzi scheme. The more difficult things are, the more you stand to gain. So that means that these uncertainties, and by the way, the East African governments this time did a very, very good job on harmonization, as Moses said over there. They all maintained certain specific bits of the theme that came out very clearly. One of them was security, but another one was uncertainty. And that was a very, very useful approach, because 2 or 3 of the things you've mentioned only happened at the tail end of the budget-making process. The Russia-Ukraine war only broke out at the start of this year. But we've been talking about this, doing budget planning for more than 8 months, or had been doing up to that point. The supply chain disruptions caused by China, shutting down provinces one after another, those really came to a fore in December, January. So uncertainty, no stranger to us in our lives. The DRC conflict also has just broken out days after we were celebrating their being admitted into the ESC. But all these things, all these call them headwinds or upheavals, they show us opportunity. When COVID-19 came, there are certain things that we were never thinking about manufacturing in Uganda. Today, we have them on the table. One of them in my business, you all know I bought a Coca-Cola product. One of them is industrial sugar. Within 2 years, we have an industrial sugar factory in Uganda at Kinyara. Great. If it hadn't been for COVID-19, Ugandan sugar would still have been produced brown, raw, and on surplus. It would still be getting exported to countries that would be fine and make more money out of it. Now, Coca-Cola can buy sugar from Masindi. There are many other factories that have come up in this recent period. Why? Because of those uncertainties. Now, with the Africa Free Continental Trade Area, we've been talking about all the great opportunities it presents if things are smooth and hunky-dory. The bigger markets, more people to learn from, more people to buy from and do partnerships with. But if we now begin looking at these uncertainties we mentioned and compare with the opportunity we have as a continent, with this continental free trade area that enables us to, for instance, form joint ventures across 50 countries, where Russia cannot supply, or the Ukraine cannot supply the US or an Asian country, we can take over. And that's the thinking that we need to adopt, develop and adopt and spread across the continent. Now, that thinking, of course, has got to begin here within the individual countries and then go regional. And that's why when we talk about the East African community, it's our first important step as the individual countries, because it enables us to scale within our controlled environment here and then grow that advantage of scale to go cross-continent. And once we've done that, then we go for the rest of the globe. Donald there has made very, very good points. And I honestly believe that, yes, the East African community, the political side of this region, and the private sector, we, the business community, we have a great opportunity to put together what we're doing, grow manufacturing, industrialization, because that in turn creates more jobs for people, puts money in the pockets of East Africans. And again, that's something that I really need to applaud the governments for doing. When you read the three budget speeches, even before you read the budget itself, the budget is more complicated than the budget speech. There's a focus, a very clear focus on putting more money into the pockets of the people, the East Africans. Why? So that, of course, they can live, and so that we have fewer chances of them, rioting and going haywire, but also so that they can spend, which spending will trigger more production. And in the process, the governments will earn the tax revenue. So the government's made a wide choice in saying we are not going to increase taxes. No, let's spur the economy, enable that engine to run, so that even at the existing tax rates in general, we can collect more. That was the government putting on their business thinking hat. Now we need to think a bit more, and we need to consult each other, as we've been doing in the past, but consult each other with a more forward-looking and wider scope intention. And the Africa Free Continental Trade Area enables us to look at that wider scope more realistically. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simon from Kigali, and keep enjoying the chogam. I will enjoy the hotels they built for this purpose when we come over. Hopefully the rates will be lower. But he's talked and raised quite a number of interesting things. As an economist, I always read The Economist. And one of the interesting things in the recent release of The Economist is as crossing borders becomes difficult, either because of disruptions of COVID, people have been to centralize, and then the politics and security concerns, countries now want to force private sector to invest where they are friendly countries. So even if you are an investor and your business is in China, but you are biased towards the US will be telling you to relocate. And we have seen lots of companies leaving China for Vietnam. But also what we are also seeing is companies increasing inventories. So rather than trade across the border, they're increasing their own inventories within the country. And Simon has just mentioned industrial sugar, which is right now being manufactured in Kinyara rather than coming from abroad. Now that's a good thing. You are building your resiliency that even if borders are closed, you still have what you need within the country. But that certainly affects Mr. Okaka's business. The borders, when they are on off, the revenue targets may falter. Whichever reason that makes them on off. So talking about the on and off border conflicts between these partner states, how has this destabilized your targets? But also there are issues of the CET, where I would say no more taxation of the trade within. So that border ceases to be there for you to get revenue of a factor that's just across the border. How has this affected your targets and the planning? And whatever challenges you have, I would shift them to your boss who gives you the targets and the policies. Thank you.
Yes, it's true. When there is a conflict or any dispute, it destabilizes the revenue. And we have seen this happening, and when you look at the history, just within the ESC, I think there have been some conflicts or dispute over a few years. When you look at Uganda, DRC, Uganda, Rwanda, Uganda, Kenya, the Mijingo, then Uganda, South Africa, Uganda, Tanzania, Mozambique, Tanzania, Malawi, Rwanda, Burundi, Rwanda, DRC, in all these borders. Just to cite one example, in 2018, Uganda exported worth 257 million US dollars of goods to Rwanda. That was in 2018. But immediately the following year, this dropped to 54 million US dollars, which is significant just within a year. And we have also seen this as well this was a case of like when the Uganda, Rwanda, the border being closed. This affected our business and revenue per se. Nevertheless, we are very optimistic that now the borders are open, and we expect that this should normalize. Just looking at the data, the export to Rwanda in the year, looking at March, the month ending, the data shows that Uganda export to Rwanda average at 826 million monthly. We have seen a sharp drop from the 62.6 billion that we are having previously in 2019 per se. So looking at this, though there are opportunities that come up, obviously we're looking at the markets in the DRC Congo. We have also seen a sharp increase in exports. But normally what happens is that when there is a conflict or there is a disruption within trade within the cross-border, it affects our economy. But nevertheless, the hope or the beauty we have is that looking at all these things, within the ESC, one common thing that we all agree on is that there is political goodwill. For the partner states, we agree that peace, security, and stability is very important for trade to go on and improve livelihood within the ESC citizens. And then the other thing, the aspect is, fortunately, we also have a framework within the within ESC or the fora where such grievances can be addressed. That's what gives the assurance. But ultimately, all this affects our balance of trade and indeed the revenue collection. That we have seen it happening. Whenever we have a conflict, it affects our revenue collection. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can appreciate the challenges they have. Quite often it is easy to say, let's switch off the microphone for the feedback. It's sometimes easy to say I didn't meet the target, but you can hear the complication that every time you hear bombs instead of sacks of rice and fish crossing the border, that is going to translate into a target. So allow me to invite the two members of the second panel to join this panel. Madam Zerid Zigiti, my friend, where are you? Are you in the house? I was not notified that you'll be online. And then Honorable Afidra Olema Ronald from the ESC Parliamentary Forum on East African Community Affairs. Please join the floor. I still have enough seats. I want to leave with a full board plane, or at least with very few seats, because you all know what no seats mean on the plane. You make losses. So let me fill up my business class wing, at least then I can make losses in the economy class where the rest of you are seated. But I'll be coming to you to listen to your conversations shortly. You'll give me your views and questions. Maybe let me pick two hands from there. Anybody on the floor? Yes, there's one there, and there's two. Please give them the microphones. Let me listen in from the people on the other side of the podium. Do we have mobile microphones? There are two hands over there. Where is Madame Zigiti? Is she in the house?
Yes. Thank you for moderation. I just have two comments. My name is Julius Mukunda from the Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group, and comments are really reserved for my friend Kagwa. There shouldn't be any doubt that we don't support integration. We do. However, my biggest problem is how are we cushioning ourselves from these revenue losses? It came out even yesterday. And my friend Kagwa is, what precautions are we putting in place that we are losing these billions, we shall gain them from here? I'm afraid this is on the pretext that things will be well. That's number one. The lastly, number two, is with the revenue loss, we are hoping that maybe internally we can generate more resources, but already internally we are giving a lot of exemptions themselves. 7.7 trillion in terms of exemptions. Where are we left to collect money to finance our development? I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Julius Mukunda. The microphone here. Those are questions I had for my friend Kagwa. Thank you very much. I will keep my friendships, and in case he's annoyed with the questions, I will say it is you who asked them. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you. My name is Msoke Thaddeus Nagenda, Chairman Kasita, Uganda. Protocol observed. I want to thank the panelists for the presentations and Siantine for this engagement. Our concern as Kasita, mainly we have had several challenges. When we engage my friend Kagwa and URA, most of the challenges, we have found that our local industries have several challenges because the operation costs in Uganda are so high. So you find the products locally produced, the cost is slightly higher than what we import from China. And you find that when we try to engage Minister of Finance to see how can we utilize the integration to make sure that Uganda turns to be the Dubai of Africa, we had several challenges there. So you find that we thought when Congo comes on, we are going to make more profits. But you find that again, even the chains of trade at times have challenges. You find the manufacturer wants even to take the product to the last consumer. So somewhere being eliminated from the chain of trade. And then secondly, we thought that since even they have challenges with capacity, our industries have challenges of capacity. Even they cannot meet the local market. So you find that we are trying to substitute the demand with importation. So we are worried. When we want to fully utilize the integrated market, then it means that they will have to increase the cost of their products. I mean the price of their products, because they are so much on demand. So we have also their question marks. Now, currently, we are trying to see that how can we try to promote diversification in traders? Because most of the time, President was saying that we don't want to do bobo. We don't want to add value. But just imagine in Uganda, just connecting electricity, you need 750. Just now, if you want to set up a cottage industry, it's a very big challenge. Plus bribing. You know, if you don't bribe, it can take years.
I was wondering why you had left that.
Because to get connected.
750 is minus that other component.
So that's like 1 million. Then, in case you need a pole, those are 2 millions. Now plus a bribe, like 3 millions. So you find that we need to see that how can we reduce the cost of doing business. Lastly, we have been engaging Ministry of Finance about high transport costs. I'm happy through the engagement, the Ministry of Finance decided stakeholders to be consulted during the budget process, where we submitted our presentations, and we are lucky that they allocated a better percentage to improve infrastructure, because you are competing with Kenyan industries who have cheaper transport costs of their inputs, and now transporting raw material from the Mombasa to Uganda is so costly. So we thought that if they invest in the lorry, it's the cheapest means of transport. You never know, somewhere it can favor our comrades through the Uganda Manufacturers Association, and we were trying to start also value addition. Thank you. I submit.
Thank you very much. Kasita is no longer necessarily Kampala City Traders Association. It's Kasita Uganda. So they upgraded and picked up all the other traders. But also that's what you do when you want to survive in the market. Otherwise, Guru Traders Association was going to come up. Because now we have many cities, there are 7. So you try and ring fence the space before the other become cities. So we can only have one. Honorable Ronald, I want to come to you. And we are speaking to really, I have no more questions for my friend Kagwa. Rather enough have been packed to him, which I even had here. But I'll bring him in at the end, because sometimes you want finance investment, infrastructure, as he talked about. Some of these monies are going to be loans. And in the event URA doesn't find the money, we cannot stop the infrastructure, he has to borrow. So really, it's becoming very, very tricky. Financing the development we need to do, the revenues are falling, the debt is rising, the question that Julius has raised. And I'm not seeing my friend Zerid Azigiti, who is the acting commissioner, data and policy, whether she's supposed to be online. But if I do not catch her, the director is here, he will answer those spaces. But let me first go to Honorable and ask, in these perspectives, how can countries equitably finance the development of infrastructure? How do we manage debt and some of these issues? Sometimes it's a political space. You politicians just say us do this. Please speak to that and the theme.
Thank you, Dr. Muhumuza. Sometimes having you as a moderator is quite challenging, because the questions you raise to some of us may be very challenging to answer. But by and large, I want to thank you for inviting me, the organizers, for this important dialogue workshop. I sit under the Parliamentary Forum for East African Commission Affairs. And as a first legislator in the 11th Parliament, and after having worked within the region, I found that parliamentary affairs relevant affairs for me to have an influence in. And this sitting is in line to what I've learned within the region. Listening carefully, for the roles of parliament or a member of parliament. And all this that we've been talking about comes to our dock, where the people who make the policies and the laws and the legislations in these countries, whether it is East African Commission, Parliament, or whether it is any of the member states' parliament, all our role is paramount around legislation. And we made it an important issue that because the countries are faced with the issues of the pandemic, as a Ugandan parliamentary, we decided that, one, we should recover from our economy, and the executive took it up. And that's why, as a country, we don't have any other taxes levied on. We agreed as parliament. And I think as a Ugandan parliament, you need to credit us that we too are feeling the shock. And that's why the Minister of Finance said no taxes. We agreed. The second issue of responding to how best we can finance our budget and our development infrastructure within is Ugandan parliament is a little bit unique. We have development infrastructure financed by the taxes collected by Uganda Revenue Authority. During the budget speech, you heard it rightly from His Excellency, that part of our development has been over time, last 5 years or 10, is being financed by us. And that's where the country, and that's where as members of parliament, we want to realign our legislation and our policies so that if the taxes are collected effectively, and this should be seen in the people that our taxes are working for us. Second, the third issue is we came up with proposals of how effective, now that we are not increasing taxes, how effective should the taxes that are already there be collected? And we heard about the minister talking about the 5 different tax bills that were really ascended to by the president, was it this month? Or, yeah, this month. We know we have a lot of money in this country, but we're not paying our taxes as effectively as Ugandans. The other issue is that I don't know whether the laws are made for a few Ugandans. A few Ugandans pay taxes and some don't pay. And we're like, what is happening in the tax collection? You mentioned about the exemptions given still by the government. We have a lot of exemptions indeed given. If these exemptions were not to be given, and these would be turned as revenues for our country and would be channeled for development. And as Parliament, we do hope that the new amendments we passed as tax amendments would enhance our tax or revenue collection to facilitate our development infrastructures via payment for it. The second issue is, the third issue is, as Parliament, we approve loans. And Ugandan Parliament, I may speak to, we have 25 trillion to be collected by Uganda Revenue Authority. We have about 6.2 something trillion as loans that we are looking forward to finance our development infrastructure. Now, as Parliament, we want to see where effectively shall these loans be utilized. The country has been getting a lot of loans, and some of the loans have never been utilized. If we're financing the roads have never taken off. But as a country, we are paying the interest on these loans. Now, as the 11th Parliament, we want to see effective use of the different loans that we shall be getting as a country to finance our development infrastructure. The third issue, or the fifth issue you may say, is that we want to appeal to our government. Government borrowed money from us, domestic borrowing. And this has construed our people to productively engage in productive agriculture or productive industrialization in this country. Our appeal is, can government release people's money, especially the domestic money that they borrowed, so that this money can be invested for productive sectors that we have in this country. The last one I would say is, if you look at the theme of our budget this year, and I'm glad that East African community harmonized it, and that is the trend we are looking forward into, accelerating economic recovery and enhancing productive sectors for improved livelihood. Uganda's economy is driven by agriculture. And as a country, we have come up with a number of industrial parks Some are mostly likely going to be for agro-industrialization. Now, how much of this money is going to be engaged in agro-industrialization? That we've budgeted for. 2, how much of this money and at what cost? The private sector, Kasita, has raised asked a question. The cost of borrowing this money for the private sector, in my view, in this country, is so exorbitant. We cannot afford, as a country, to borrow money for agricultural financing, for agro-industrialization. Now, if we're in agricultural economy, economy being driven by agriculture, the banks cannot sustainably lend to the agricultural sector productively, leave alone the interest rates, 23%, 19%. As a policymaker, we need to be convinced and we need to pass legislation if you want to finance development. This is my view. We must rein over a central bank to bring down the lending rates. Assuming if the lending rates in this country are below 3%, then that means any private sector engaged in agriculture can be able to maybe borrow from the commercial banks at 5%. And will be able to invest this money in productive agriculture. Towards the end, we create more employment for the people. And talking about the free trade zone within, the gaps that exist, the potential that exists for food to move within Uganda, within ESC, within Africa, and the value addition, we can be able to enhance our productivity and pay more taxes and remit. The tax default rates will be quite low as a country, and therefore we can be able to thrive so much in this economy of this country. That said, if the lending rates become low, default rates would be far much less. I like the idea of the East African community creating the one currency. And we know we borrow from everywhere. I know we are time bad. I want to end with this comment on especially the cost of borrowing. How many more of the African countries borrow from within other than borrowing from IMF, World Bank, from those who are controlling us? Because those who are borrowing to us do not want us to develop. This is my view. If the more we borrow from within for development, the more we borrow from within for agricultural investment, the more we borrow from within, we can be, in near future become self-sustained, and our policies will reflect what we are. Mzee Julius Nyerere made a statement. Let me end with that. He talked about globalization. We're talking about East African community. All the 5 member states or the 7 member states now in East Africa, we are all different economically. That's why in the presentation of Siatin, 40% or 42% of Uganda's taxes or money comes through customs, and 58% is through domestic revenue. But when you get to Kenya, it is the reverse. So if all of us are different, and more so within Uganda, we need to put ourselves in the African free trade zone with where we can be able to match. So Julius Nyerere said, in a boxing ring, you put the lightweight with the lightweight. In East Africa, we are fairly the same. But globally, we cannot be able to compete effectively so that we can be able to finance our development infrastructure. We don't have the resources. But we have the abilities to convert this paradigm shift. All the raw materials in the world are within Africa. We have the potential much more than any other. And I would like to urge us, as Parliament, we'll be able to pass policies to convert our raw materials into the final products. I know the coffee deal is an issue we have in this country, but those are the thoughts that we want. Can we make value and expect final products that can fetch more for us so that we can finance our budgets, our development infrastructure, other than exporting raw materials that we rely on loans from external financing. I submit.
Thank you very much. A lot of meat to chew over on issues from the legislation's perspective, the legislator's perspective, and they are quite fundamental in these decision processes. As we borrow domestically, we are sometimes accusing Kagwa here that banks cannot lower the rate below 3% when government itself has said, I'm ready to borrow at 14%. So sometimes it's a conversation we want the three arms of government to have a conversation on before they even come to tell us what has happened there. Because the private sector is waiting for that conversation. Because government will say, I want to borrow domestically, and they are going to borrow at 14%. You will approve it in parliament. Kasita here will begin to face the brunt of that decision. But you have also talked about international fellows, and I have somebody who is based at the International Center for Tax and Development. Adrian Liam told you you are online. You want to have your time now to give your submission. Thereafter, I will come to Mr. Kagwa to give me his views and closing remarks. Adrian Lee, you have the floor.
Hello. Thank you for having me at your dialogue. It's been really interesting to listen to the views and opinions shared by the panelists so far, and see some familiar names in the audience. So I was asked to speak about sort of two issues broadly. The one is, how is Uganda and the EAC more widely able to use tax policy and fiscal policy to respond to increasing global pressures, and the EAC and the rest of the world are not immune to the inflationary pressures, supply chain issues, rising oil prices. You know, many countries are facing the same kinds of problems that the EAC faces. So how can tax policy be used to respond to that? And the second issue is, I was quite involved in the drafting of the DRMS in 2017 to 2019, and the Siatini panelist organizers asked me to speak about how the DRMS propels Uganda towards the ambition of tax harmonization within the EAC. So starting with the first, I think broadly there's two prongs to this answer. Increasing taxation is obviously easier when it's broadly supported by a economic development and that addresses a tax policy that addresses societal issues. So how does that look in a country like Uganda? In my mind, the focus should be on increasing the equity of the tax system. That speaks to both domestic and international tax loopholes. For instance, I was quite passionate while I was in Uganda about taxing high net worth individuals and wealthy corporations. This is not just an international tax issue, but also an issue in the domestic tax policy. For instance, property taxes, I think, in Uganda are underutilized and can quickly be scaled up without much of an adverse effect on incentives to invest and to innovate. They're also economically efficient taxes that can be quite tangibly linked to service provision. And so it's an area worth exploring more seriously. There are also many opaque tax incentives for investors that are more motivated by politics, I think, than by economic strategy. And this, over time, eats away at your potential revenue base. And there's more, I think there's more scope to increase the transparency around these tax exemptions. This is also then speaks to the second part of the question, which is on ESC harmonization. One area where intergovernment cooperation could be more effective within the region is on tax exemptions. I think in the past, the approach has been quite sort of beggar thy neighbor, and investors have been able to pit regional players and neighbors against each other, placing more pressure to offer bigger and better incentives over time to attract investment. But in the long run, this just drives down the effective tax rates that you're able to have anywhere. And so over time, you just erode your own tax base, introduce more and more loopholes for investors to exploit, and as a result, lower your tax collection overall. So I think, the EAC now, with an expanded membership and a strong economic position, have the potential to push back and collaborate more effectively on an approach that's agreed between the countries, so that you're not sort of drawing down each other's revenue potential over time. In terms of taxing the wealthy, I think we need to look more carefully at the non-wage income of relatively high net worth individuals in Uganda. This sort of reflects a weakness in both administration, tax enforcement, and the tax policy. But what is happening, I think, in the personal income tax system is that a relatively small share of the population of formal sector wage earning employees bear a high tax burden. I'm talking here about teachers, nurses, public sector employees, those who are subject to PAYE and have their tax automatically deducted. And the tax rates in Uganda come in at a fairly low level and escalate fairly quickly. So what lands up happening is that your teachers and nurses bear a heavy tax burden, whereas those who are earning non-wage income or sort of self-employed individuals are able to more cleverly engage in tax evasion, as they're not having income tax deducted at source. So I think this calls for sort of 3 or 4 areas. One is more effective enforcement of taxation on relatively wealthy individuals. The second kind of area would be the better enforcement of taxes on capital wealth. And the third area would be to relook at the progressivity of the income tax schedule, especially where they're coming in at a very low level, and reassess whether this is truly a sort of equitable approach. On this, Uganda, I think, can also take inspiration from countries that are looking to tax wealthy individuals, or at least detect tax evasion by wealthy individuals through kind of lifestyle audits. They look at those who are buying luxury cars, who travel very frequently, who have big share portfolios, import and export extensively, taking out large loans, and see whether those individuals are potentially evading taxes that they're due.
Smart 24, driving business. Smart 24, driving business. Smart 24.